Welcome to the Say Yes Movement podcast with Heather and John, where we help you with your professional and personal growth, helping you say yes to all the scary stuff. Hey, Heather, how's it going?
It's going good, John. Happy Friday. It is Celebration Friday, and there is so much to celebrate. You know what? I am starting to get really energized and excited. And there's like so many reasons, but I want to start with what you're celebrating with this week, John. What has
Yeah,
happened? What stands out for you? And for
yeah.
anyone listening, we want to hear what you're celebrating as well. So join in the fun.
Yeah, no, thank you, Heather. Listen, I'm celebrating consistency. I know it's not my word for the year, but it's one of the things I've been focusing on. Consistency in my meditation, consistency in my exercise, consistency in growing and developing my business, right? Like it's one of the things I'm constantly focused on. And there's something to the power of consistency. It's like, I think about the snowball, right? Like you just keep rolling. And sometimes, it just seems really small, but at some point it's like, wow, how do we get here? And that's what consistency has led me to. And I'm feeling great, especially the meditation piece. I know this is one of the things that you practiced a lot in 2023. And there's so much clarity that just comes from either sitting in silence or working through a guided meditation. To me, that's really helped provide clarity and direction. So I'm definitely celebrating that. What are you celebrating this week?
I am celebrating feedback. I'm celebrating feedback that we get from our listeners and feedback in the form of storytelling. People always think, I don't have a story to tell. My story isn't big enough or good enough. And what I always tell people is that there's someone just like you at a moment in time where they're unsure, and your story will actually activate them and help them get to that next level. And we love hearing stories from our listeners, not only just on the comments, but also, we get individual notes all the time, and we love hearing those stories. But what I also love is when you actually share that you've shared your stories and the impact and the ripple effect it's happened. So there's been a lot more of those lately, and keep them coming. So I want to celebrate that we are all storytellers. We are all influencers. We are all people that can create that positive ripple effect. And you don't need a podcast to do that. You just need to smile and, be curious and ask questions. So for all of our listeners out there, a big thank you. For all of the people that myself or John have ever coached or been in contact with, thank you for bringing the messages forward. You are now the curator of those messages. So just love that, John. And it's quite humbling, and I'm very humbled and thankful for all of the support that we get.
Yeah, no, listen, me too. It's you touched on a really important point is we all have a story, right? And it was interesting because one of the exercises I gave to one of my classes was, you got to share a 3-minute story about yourself. And what you don't realize is 3 minutes, you can cover a lot of things in 3 minutes. It doesn't seem like a lot, but 3 minutes is a lot. And I was so inspired by some of the stories that they shared. We all, when I first got into speaking, I don't know about you, but when I first got into it, I'm like, what am I going to talk about? Right? Like, who am I, to share and to kind of be out there, be on a stage somewhere to share something. And one of the things I learned from a great mentor was we all have something to share. And what I didn't realize until, I got more into it is, as we open ourselves up, there's power to vulnerability, right? As we open ourselves up and we share that story, there was always that one person that came up to me afterwards and said, you know what, that's the one thing I really needed to hear right now. And this is why it's so important that we get out there and we just share from a place. And here's the thing, right? Like it has to come from a place, from an intention of helping and an intention of adding value to others. Not really to toot our horns. Yes, we have to toot our horns. We have to, showcase ourselves a little bit, but do it in a way that's humble, but do it in a way that offers value to others. And that to me has just been like a game changer. And, to listen to these stories from these students, and a lot of them are newcomers to the country, it's like, wow, you went through all of that just to be here with us.
Wow.
And, it moved people in the room, like it moved the other students in the room. And, when they got off, out of the front of the room to kind of sit down to get some of that feedback, they didn't realize that the impact that they were making just by sharing that story. So you all have a story. You all have a story. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Yeah.
You know what? I need to let's keep going on this theme because I think it's a really important theme around the storytelling. And remember, storytelling is you got to leave it open so that the person that's hearing the story takes out the lessons that matter to them. And oftentimes we tell a story with the intent to also, give advice. And storytelling is not advice giving. And that's a mistake that often people make and leaders make, that, oh, everyone wants me to solve their problem. And in fact, if you want total buy-in for the next step of action from anyone, the best way is to have them find the solution themselves and then commit to those actions. So when you're telling a story, you can even set it up with, would you like me to tell a story when I failed? Would you like me to tell a story when I felt vulnerable? Would you like to hear a story about when I felt similar to what I think you might be going through? And would that be of assistance to you? And so you're asking permission to share a story, but then letting it flow and see what comes out of it. What I always like to do is, after I've shared a story like that, is say, what's the main message that you're hearing or taking away? Or is there anything that you would do based on what my challenges were that, and how does it make you feel? So there's a lot of questions you can ask people after the story to hear back what you've heard. And I'll tell you, I've shared the same story multiple times, and depending on who the audience is, they get different parts of it every single time. So your story, even though it's the same, the audience and what they get from it is different. Oh my God, you have your mug, John. Look, we're twinning. Believe.
I believe. No, but you touch on a really good point. And to all of that, right? Like when you share those moments of opportunity, I love that you talked about, I'm gonna say asking for permission to share, right? And actually, it's one of those tools that we use in coaching as well. Is it okay if I share an experience from my past with you that might, relates to what we're talking about? And it's interesting because I always go in thinking there's going to be something I want to share, and this is what I think they're going to take away from it. And then they come back and say, as I was listening to you, this is what showed up, and it was like something really different. And the power to all of that, and we talked about this on one of the other podcasts as well, is the power of just being present, right? So something, from us, we need to be in that moment. One of the best ways to get over the fears of public speaking and the fear of being nervous on stage is to not make it about you. It's one of the things that we talked on our workshop. And, for anybody who's interested and wants to, get some insights on that, we have a digital program that kind of speaks to it. But when you don't make it about you and you make it about them, means you have to be completely present when you're delivering your presentation, your talk, your workshop, your story, right? Because that puts you in a completely different frame of mind. And I know you do this because I've heard it, and I've heard some of the stories that you've told over and over again. But there's always little minor. I'm gonna call them enhancements based on what's happening in the room, right? Because we kind of, the story's the same, the theme's the same, nothing changes, but sometimes the way we deliver it or certain language that we might use in it might be a little bit different, so it resonates with the audience a little bit better. And we're not changing the theme of the story, but we're delivering it in a way that the audience really needs to hear it. Yes. And that only comes from being present. If your mind is off somewhere else, you can't deliver that message to them. And don't expect the message that you think you're going to deliver land on them. They're going to think what they need in that moment, right? Yeah. And I always think about what you say. Talk to a younger version of you, right? What does that younger version need to hear so you can get to where you are right now in this moment? And that has been so powerful. I think about that every time I'm in front of, whether it's a classroom, whether it's, corporate clients, whatever that is, it's, I think about that younger version of me that's sitting in the audience, and what do they need, right? Yes. What's going to add value that's going to create a path for them to get them to where they need to be. 100%. So powerful. And that just comes from being present, like just being present and just really, really just being present and being there, right?
Well, and when you're being present, you are not worried about what you're going to say or do, because you're really letting the moment happen around you and being a messenger of what the room needs or what the group needs. And we do a confident communicator course, and we're not saying don't practice if you're doing a speech or you're doing a presentation, but there's also practice of not practicing for those things. And what I mean by that is, could you stand up today and talk about any topic for 3 minutes without any rehearsal? And there's something that is really you have to be present to be able to do that, because you have to start to think, all right, what's in my head, and what do I want to flow out, and how do I want to curate that? And I just recently actually sat on a fireside chat, and there was lots of questions that they were going to ask me. And they said, would you like to see the questions ahead of time? I said, absolutely not. Because if I see them ahead of time, I'm going to lose sleep the night before. I'm going to start thinking about my answers. I'm going to say, oh, that's not good enough. And all of those limiting beliefs, or those automatic negative thoughts, those ants in our head, are going to come in. And in fact, they won't get the authentic me as the answers. They'll get some curated version of me, of what I think people want to hear, as opposed to what is coming from my heart. And so there also needs to be, in your communication elevation leadership training, places where you can just on the fly practice presenting. And John, you do this in your classroom. I do this in my classroom with my students. I'll give them 10 minutes to curate an idea, and then they'll come up and they'll present to the class. And that is one, to test how they're absorbing the knowledge. But really, and I shared this with my students last week, this is so that you're ready for that interview, so that you don't know what the question is and you can answer it like that very quickly. And there is so much power, especially for students that are going to an interview. They might not have the lifelong experience, but they could actually reference and say, you know what, I have some knowledge because I've done some case studies, and here's what I would do in your situation. So even though they might not have lived it, being on the fly and being able to do that is so important.
Yeah. Well, you touch on a really good point. And first off, it's not just for students, right? So some of us, I know there's a lot of changes that are happening in the work environment right now. There's people that are, being right-sized out of organizations. There's changes that are happening in the industry, especially tech, right? And, knowing, right? Like sometimes, and this is, one of the areas that I coach on, is sometimes we forget what we know, right? And then we walk in the room, you touch on a great point. You have to prepare, because it's one of the things that we talk about: prepare, practice, get yourself to a place where it is just natural for you to talk about, right? You don't want to sound scripted, because scripted, it comes off scripted, right? Like, and for anybody who's listening to us, we don't sound scripted, partly because we're not, but the other part is because we're living what we're talking about every single day, right? So this isn't something that we just learn and then we're sharing. This is something we live, right? And, the people that I found that deliver the best messages are the people who live the word, right? Live what they talk about, live what they, share with others. They live it, right? And we're living it. We all have those experiences. We're all going through things. We've all had successes. We've all had challenges or opportunities or failures, but we forget about them in the moment, right? Like, so this is, one of the things that we talked about in another podcast, is having that brag book. And the brag book isn't just for your successes, but it's also for the opportunities that you went through, the challenges that you went through, and how you came through them and what you learned from them. Because as an employer, as a hiring manager, as a recruiter, they all want to know, what did you do to get through those difficult moments? What lessons did you learn?
Yeah, it's not the easy moments that we learn those lessons about ourselves. It's the difficult ones. It's the challenging ones. It's the ones where we're like, am I really doing this? Is this even possible? And then you have to believe, right? Which is, of course, this is both of our words this year, and it is to honor Ted Lasso. If you haven't watched that show, we both highly, highly recommend it, because there are so many leadership lessons in this show. I think I'm going to start watching it again, actually, because I'm sure I missed some of them. But you have to believe that what you're going to do is going to impact someone else. And if that's overwhelming for you, remember, you're just impacting one person in the room that looks and sounds like you did just a few steps behind you in your career. And that makes it so much easier to do.
Yeah, actually, so you don't have to believe it. So here's the thing, right? So,
and this, say more.
I know. It's like, ooh, wait a minute, we're getting controversial here, maybe a little bit, and that's okay. That's totally okay. But you don't have to believe whether or not you're going to make an impact. You are making an impact.
Oh, yes.
Right. So it doesn't matter whether or not you believe it, it's happening, right? So you think about kids, right? You think about, if you're a parent, you have children, things that you say and do, even though you might not think they're listening, they are listening, right? The people around you at work, the people you think that aren't listening to you are listening. You are having that impact on them whether or not you believe you are. So here's the thing, and the reason I bring this up is, if you are aware, you know what kind of impact you're going to bring to them, right? So we know our impact is really to make people's lives better, right? Like to add value and to really contribute in a way that's powerful for them. That's what I believe. That's what I believe I want to bring to the table every time I get in front of people, whether it's through the podcast, whether it's through my video content, whether it's through a classroom. It's all about adding value that's going to enrich their lives in one way or another. I know that, so I can be intentional about it. So because I know that, it allows me to act differently. And here's the thing, you are making that impact, whether or not you believe it. You are. So the question 100%. Is, what kind of impact do you want to make?
Yeah, and I think that's I have a real life story that I can share with you, John. And I don't know if any of you listening have ever been in a room or around someone that just gives off such positive energy that you want to be really close to them, you want to be around them. And I love it when people bring their whole self and their full energy into a room, whether it be a classroom or whether it be at work, but you can feel it. It's very palatable. And I know that I have that ability. It's a skill that I've been practicing as much as I can. But I also know when I didn't get enough sleep, I didn't eat right that day, I might have overbooked my calendar, all the things that might have happened. I actually can do the opposite and just as quickly sort of suck the energy out of the room. And so I know that I can use the superpower for good, which is give everyone my energy, but I have to make sure that I'm giving myself the energy to have enough to give. And, that's really important, that you're also aware of when you're not showing up the best version of you, and make sure that you're doing all the things behind the scenes, that you are making the best impact that you can. And it's something, a life lesson that I learned a long time ago when I realized I need to make sure that my self-care is top notch to make the best impact that I possibly can.
Yeah, no, you touched on a really important point. Like, you got to make sure your cup is full, right? And if if your cup's not full and you're serving from empty, you're not getting a good dish, right? You're not getting a good serving of coffee or belief or whatever that is, right? Like, you're at the tail end of it. And it's funny you say that, because I worked with the coach years ago, and he said, is your cup full? Like, are you walking in excited? Are you motivated? And there were moments where, 100%, I wasn't at my best. And I thought those are the moments you pull back, right? Those are the moments that you can step away. When you can't step away, you got to find a way to get there, right? And it's part of this is also one of the things that we covered in our workshop, where there's so much good stuff there. You got to put yourself into state, even if it's just for a moment, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour. We talk about getting into that power pose. That is a state shifting activity, so you can get yourself into a state where you feel really powerful. It's kind of like, you're supercharging your cup, you're filling it up just for the moment that you need, and then it's
And I describe sort of like, low energy. But if you're ever wondering, am I being present or not present, just do a self-check. If you're picking up your phone, if you are thinking about what is next in the day, if you're sort of thinking,
Heather, I don't know if we lost you there. Are you still there?
Hello? There, we're back now. We're back.
Yeah, no, quick interrupt. And it's okay. It's all good. You know what? Listen, this happens. This is the internet. It's all good.
Exactly.
You're finishing up on.
I was just saying, if just check in for your being present. And if you're picking up your phone in a meeting, if you're thinking about the next meeting, if there is something that's pulling your energy away, then you're not being present. And therefore, you're actually taking away from your presence and not honoring your brand and honoring the people that are around you. So, maybe the meetings are too long. Maybe you need to say, all right, that's all we're going to solve today. And we're going to come back to the table with this in another few days. So check in on your own behaviors. And if you see that your brain is floating, your actions are floating, you're not being present, then you're not going to be making the impact that you wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. How many times do we sit in meetings and we're totally checked out? People's phones are picked up in their hands. They're messaging each other on their laptops. 100%. That's the time to call and pull the plug, right? Like, it's time to move on to something else, because this just isn't working. And
That's right.
it's okay, right? And if your word, I don't know if what people's words are, but sometimes there's a bit of courageousness that needs to happen. Sometimes there's a little bit of boldness that needs to happen to pull those things together. Be bold, be courageous, and say, look, this isn't working right now. Let's just move on, right? Like,
Well, and I
yeah.
think that's the call to action for everyone this week is, why don't we do a self-presence audit? And what I mean by that is just go about your day and check in. How often are you finding yourself drifting away from the moment? And how often are you finding yourself absolutely 100% present? And what I can tell you is, if you want more time in your calendar, be present more often, because the things that are taking you 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour is because you're not being present for that whole time. You could probably finish that task or that conversation with that person in 15 minutes that you logged for a half hour, because you're being present for the full 15 minutes. But the first step of awareness is to do your personal presence audit. And so I urge you to do that. It's a daily log. You just keep a notebook present and just like give yourself a score. Give yourself a score out of 1 to 10. This is all self-scoring. So, it's just awareness for yourself. And that's the call to action. It's a really, really important thing to do. And I'll tell you, you'll be shocked at how many times you could be more present for the people you love, for your friends and family, this is an audit for your whole life, not just at work. And then you'll start to notice how other people are not be present and how you might be able to influence. And I think that would be step 2 that you could move on to. But start with the audit.
Yeah, no, listen, I feel like we could do a whole podcast just on the audit and how it breaks down trust if you're not there, right? If you're not present in the moment. So anyways, we're not going to go there because we're at time already. So thank you for everybody for listening into the Say Yes Movement podcast. Just remember, when you shift your mindset, you shift your life. Wishing you all a great one. Talk to you all soon. Take care.